Hi, so I just wanted to go through a couple of the techniques that I discussed in class with the watercolor. So I gave you in your set, you have your set of watercolors, the ovals, and you also have these watercolor crayons. So there are a little bit of differences between the way that you use both. And there's also similarities. Basically, this stuff will turn to paint and become water soluble and move around with water when you add water to either one of these. But when you are using the ovals, you're going to be adding water directly to these surfaces here. When you're adding the color to or water to the watercoloring crayons, you're not adding water directly to these. You're adding water to an area that has been scribbled. So I'm going to go through both of those processes really quickly. I gave you a bunch of brushes. Flat brushes are ones that look like little tiny painter's brushes, very flat, as though they took pliers and they squished down that metal. And it's, very straight along the top there. So this will allow you to paint very straight and controlled lines. Okay. Brushes like this, they're known as round brushes, and the round brushes have a point. So these guys have a lot more versatility. If you use the point, you can get very, very fine. If you push down on it, you can get real wide, and they tend to hold a little bit more water and a little bit more paint. So I gave you a nice variety, different sizes and stuff, so you can explore those. Your set of watercolors came with a brush, as well as your watercoloring crayons. They came with a brush as well, and of course you can try those out as you'd like as well. So to use these, the colors are marked down here, okay? Right there. The one that has the red into the black, these would be your primary and secondary colors in black and brown. So you would have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and then black and brown. The 8 set up here that starts with white and ends with like a reddish orange have your your tertiary colors. So you're going to have your red violet, your blue violet, your blue green, your yellow orange, and red orange, and then your bonus one is this turquoise blue. So you have your primaries, your secondaries, and your tertiaries, plus black, plus brown, plus white, plus a bonus turquoise blue. Okay. So to use watercolor from the tray, you wet your brush. You basically get this surface wet, pull up the color with a clean, wet brush, and now this should be covered with that watercolor, and you can put it on top of a dry surface. If you want to make it a little less bright, you want to dull it down, or if you want to just make it lighter, you would add more water. Okay. Now you can take a wet surface and you can add paint to it, and it will behave a little bit differently. Now we're not using our watercolor paper. The watercolor paper allows us to, really saturate this paper a lot more, but if you're using thinner paper, you don't want to overdo it with the water. Now if you wanted to do like a little blending, like light to dark, you can just add a little bit of water and that same surface, and you can see that you're watering it down. Okay. You can also mix colors together. You can jump over to a different color, but what I do recommend is using a clean brush. Now I picked up some yellow, and yeah, you can apply it right on top of there and see what that looks like. Okay. There's also this area over here it's the top of your tray, but you can use this to mix colors as well. Now I had this mixed earlier. This will never dry out completely where you can't use it anymore. If you just add a little bit of water, you can lift it up again, and then you can apply that. So you can use this area to mix colors as well. Let it dry out, and you can certainly reapply the color. I do recommend when you are done with the color to wash that out so you can utilize that again. You just take some water on a paper towel. Okay. And same kind of idea. I do recommend if you end up getting some paint onto areas you don't want, if you mixed some green on that yellow, you can just get it wet with a clean brush and then take a clean paper towel and you can blot it up and you can keep your area nice and clean. Okay. So that is that. Watercoloring crayons. So you will not take this, dip it into the water. What you do is, like, if you wanted to color directly on your project, I just drew a couple circles or a couple of biomorphic shapes, and you can color directly onto your project. Now, depending on the size of your area, you want to keep your brush, you know, congruent to the size of your space. So smaller spaces, smaller brush. Bigger space, you use a bigger brush. Now, to stay in the lines, what we're going to do is we're going to add water to this and it becomes water soluble, you see. But to stay in the lines, when you are painting, paint from the middle of your shape and point your brush out. So what that'll do is it'll allow you to stay in the lines. So again, same rules apply. You add a little bit more water. And as I'm painting, I'm turning my paper. Now what happens is when you are painting, right now my hand is going to be onto a wet surface. So sometimes I use my other hand as a support to hold my hand up from the paper. Sometimes you can find, you could find a cup and you can put that on your area and lean on that cup, and it keeps you from leaning onto wet paint. So when you are painting in a space and you want to stay in the lines, you have a little bit more control if you are holding your brush pointing towards the outside edge, as opposed to if you're painting, if I try to paint along that line there, it's difficult for me to see what's underneath my brush to stay in the line. So if you paint towards the center there. Okay. So that was one way. You can scribble directly onto your area and add the watercolor crayon. Or what you can do is that you could, if this is scrap paper, you basically scribble a palette. Locate the colors that you want to use and scribble and create a palette. Basically, you don't want any water to get onto these. You don't want to directly get these wet. And so what you can do is you can take your brush, you can lift the color off of here and apply it. Just like this. So I suggest with this project, I suggest to layer colors. In other words, put colors on top of other colors, whether you want to just experiment directly onto your project, which is living life dangerously, or if you want to do it on some practice paper like I'm doing and kind of make some discoveries. See what kind of look you want. So on your project, I recommend using at least 3 colors, 3 different colors, and you can blend them together. You're going to find that certain colors blend nicely together, meaning that they keep the brightness, whereas if you add opposite colors, on the color wheel, if I add some green to this red, it's going to have a different effect. Oops. What it's going to do is it's going to, neutralize the color, meaning it's just going to darken it. Okay, which might be a look, which might be a thing that you want to do, but just be aware of those changes that happen. So while you're picking colors, if you want to kind of keep it bright and fanciful, make sure that the color mixing, you want to mix colors that are similar on the color wheel. So when I was working on this one here, I did a combination of the watercoloring crayons, and I grabbed some color from here and I was applying it to my painting. And then I was even taking some of the watercolor here, and I was actually grabbing some white and I was applying it onto here. So you could use them, both the crayons and the watercolors together. The paper is going to behave differently when it's wet than when it's dry. So if you allow something to dry totally, there's certain things that are going to happen that are going to be different than if you are working on a wet surface. So you just basically want to get a feel of coloring and using the watercolors in a way that you feel really, really strongly about. So, and one last thing before you go is if you want an area to kind of dry, like if you wanted it to be lighter, you could, if the paint is wet, you can actually blot it and you can kind of remove the paint a little bit that way. All right. So just be aware that, the water will start to erode the paper. So you are going to have a bit of limitations when it comes to adding water. There will be a time where the paper is going to start to look like it's getting a little shredded. So that would be a time that you need to let that paper rest and not add water to that area anymore. And in which case, if you still wanted to add color, you might want to switch over to colored pencil later on. Okay? So reach out if you have any other questions at all. I hope this video helped. And I will see you guys soon.